All right, Mr. K here again. We're going to talk about suspension systems, part 4 today. I'm just going to dig into some of the oddball stuff, not your typical springs and shocks and struts. This is stuff that just didn't quite fit anywhere else, so we're going to just get it all done today. Talk about manual leveling suspensions, automatic leveling suspensions, sway bars, and just some oddball stuff that you see once in a long while. So manual leveling suspension, what your book calls it, is just a way to adjust the ride height of a vehicle, whether it be front, back, left, right, manually. So the operator has to do it somehow. Either you press a button that it goes up or down, or you get out and you hook a tire chuck up to the Schrader valve on a shock, but you do the work. Somehow you input an action. The car doesn't think about doing it. You think about doing it and you make it happen. Okay, and this is just an example. These are some air shocks here. You can see they have an air line coming off of them that would go to a Schrader valve somewhere, maybe by the rear bumper, for example. This one's got a valve right on top of the shock. I had these on a vehicle I had in college, and after that, I loved them. They work real well, but they're manual. I had to get out and hook a tire chuck up to them and air them up. Okay, automatic. This is probably a lot more common. Automatic leveling suspensions, or ERC. That's going to be the name for them, electronic ride control. So if you got a light on your dashboard and it just light comes on, it says ERC, that's probably what it's referring to, is something's wrong with your suspension leveling system. Okay, you see it in a lot of post 2000 luxury cars, higher end pickups. So Cadillacs, Mercury Grand Marquis, Mercedes, BMWs, Ram 3500s, that type of stuff. Probably not going to see this in like a Grand Am or Chevy Lumina or anything like that. All right, so here we've got kind of the Cadillac design. This has coil springs and it has these guys as helpers. And this is also the design that's on a Mercury Grand Marquis, kind of luxury car design, I guess you'd say. These have some air lines going to them from a compressor, and it just decides whether it needs to go up or down. And then back over here, you have a height sensor that connects to a little arm that goes down to the suspension, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, but that decides how low, or that way it tells the computer how low or high the car is sitting. Ram 3500 design, more like airbags, kind of reminds you of a semi truck. So air ride suspension right there, and I'm sure there's an airline. I can't see it from here, but obviously there'd be an airline going to that as well. And it's about $1,800 extra if you want that on a new Ram. Okay, so how does the vehicle or the computer know how much pressure is needed? How does it know how much air needs to get pumped into those shocks to level the car out? Well, they have these little things called, I think I put it up here, height sensor. Okay, so there's a ride height sensor on, sometimes it's on every wheel. On higher end cars or on newer cars, it's going to be on every wheel, but on early 2000s, it might just be in the middle of the axle, or they might just have one for the rear axle. But it tells the computer how much that spring is being compressed, essentially. So on this, it's mounted to a stationary spot on the frame. It comes out here with this arm, and it's got a little push rod that connects with some ball joints that connects to part of the suspension that moves. And of course, as the suspension gets compressed, more weight puts on it, it moves the arm. The sensor gives the computer a signal, hey, there's more weight on it. It's compressing. The computer sends more air to this shock and airs it back up. These things go bad. These electrical connectors get corroded. These wires can have issues. As you notice, they're kind of hanging out here on the front of this suspension. So again, if you use your truck off-road, a stick comes up and grabs this guy. It can pop these little ends off. I've seen that. It can rip wires out. It's another thing to go wrong. So you get a light on your dash and it's referring to one of these, just go look for the obvious first. Okay, this is a neat video. about air ride suspension, go ahead and watch that. Okay, you should have just watched that video on air ride. Okay. Another thing I want to go over with ERC is that depending on the manufacturer, this will vary, but I would say more often than not, if you're going to jack the car up and just even change the tire, the manufacturer in the owner's manual, it will tell you to disable the ERC in one way or another. So on Mercury, Grand Marquis is just examples. You could go find examples of this all day. They have an air ride off switch in the trunk. So you open the trunk, and on your left, you'll see an air ride off switch. You just flip it to off, and then it shuts off the air compressor and everything, and then you can jack it up safely. On Jeeps, okay, here's a 2015 Jeep. You have to go into the computer screen and check this tire jack mode. That will allow you to jack the car up again without air ride turning on. Now on Cadillacs, they don't give you a nice little switch. Don't know why. Well, I know why. They claim that you can jack it up without doing that, and that the vehicle's smart enough to know what you're doing. I'm a little weary of that, and a lot of mechanics are, and they don't give you a switch as far as I know. Maybe new Cadillacs do. I suppose these screen ones probably do, touch screen ones, but older ones, early 2000s, you're supposed to go pull a fuse. You have to go to the fuse box, figure out which fuse is for the ERC, and pull it out. And that's how you disable the air ride so you can change the tire. If you don't do that, on some vehicles, this is what you'll end up with for life. You will ruin the seals on your actual air springs, because what happens is the vehicle goes up in the air, the suspension gets unloaded, but the computer in the car doesn't know that. All it knows is that the car is sitting way too high because the suspension is fully extended, so it keeps lowering the air pressure. It bleeds off pressure, vents it, and what happens is it vents it until there's no pressure at all in the system, which is bad for the seals. It can ruin the seals. So, and then you drop the car on the ground, go to drive it again, and this light comes on and it never shuts off until you buy hundreds of dollars worth of parts and replace them. So don't make that mistake. Okay, let's set that aside. Again, we're switching gears, a lot of random stuff here, but we're finishing up suspensions. Let's talk about sway bars. Okay, a sway bar is usually just a chunk of metal, as you see in red here. It goes from one wheel to the other suspension, and it helps stop body roll on turns, or lower body roll. So take a look at this, cornering without a sway or an anti-roll bar, and then with, you can see the body really rolls over when you don't have a sway bar. Also called a stabilizer bar. And again, allows for more stable cornering. Okay. So some issues you may have with sway bars, where they connect. The bar itself, I think I even have this up here. The bar itself doesn't usually rust out. It's pretty thick steel. Typically don't have problems with them. They don't snap or bend, but bushings and the end links do have issues. So the right side here is what they should look like, and then obviously this is more what you see after 100,000 miles or 150,000. Causes loud clunk. You can't always find these on a shakedown. So if you are looking for sway bar issues on a shakedown that you would typically do before an alignment, you may not find these. You kind of have to grab the bar and actually rock it around with your hand. So I'd grab it right here and shake it real hard to find loose ball joints on here. Sometimes they can be tricky. Makes a clunking noise. If they go bad, you'll hear clunking when you hit a bump. Another thing, sway bar bushings a lot of times are rubber, and they crack, they fall apart, they get brittle, and they get squeaky. So, here's another picture. So if you have a vehicle that squeaks every time you hit a bump, but it passes the shakedown. You can't find any loose bearings or any bad ball joints, but you can't figure out where the squeaking's coming from. It's a good chance it's coming from these. Many times I've had that happen. It's just the rubber gets brittle and it starts dragging against that metal in a different way and it squeaks. So take some silicone spray, shoot that in there. WD-40 is probably not good for the rubber, but you could do it. Shoot that in there, and I bet you'll get rid of the squeak. Okay, enough on sway bars. Let's talk about some interesting aspects of suspensions. So this is called a transverse leaf suspension. Notice leaf spring goes all the way across. Also called a monoleaf suspension. The most popular place I think you're going to see this is on Corvettes. I think Volvo used it a little bit. GM did on some cars in the 80s, but Corvettes is kind of the owner of this design, I guess. You're going to see it most often on them. If that picture before didn't give you a good enough view of it, here's just a different way of looking at it. Leaf spring clamps here to the body and then goes out here and supports the rear wheels or front wheels. And along that line, let's talk about leaf springs that aren't made of metal. Here's some fiberglass springs. That's the most common. If it's not metal, it's typically fiberglass on, again, older vehicles. You'll notice that there's the spring, and then actually the spring itself doesn't bolt to the frame. The spring itself bolts to a bracket that bolts to the frame. That's kind of a giveaway. Also, you could take a magnet to it. Used a little more than just Corvettes, but it was used in Corvettes. Volvos and Astrovans, ironically. Don't know why, but Chevy felt the need to use them on Astrovans. But there are issues. Okay. You don't get something for nothing. So if you're going to make a spring that's lighter and maybe even takes up less space under the car, it's going to have issues. There's going to be a problem with it. And they splinter, they come apart, they break. Not that often. I don't hear of a lot of issues with these, and I haven't even seen this in person, but there are pictures online. You can look them up. Fiberglass leaf springs do break. So what's the solution to that? The solution apparently is plastic leaf springs. So Volvo is starting to put plastic leaf springs in their cars now, and they believe that will stop all the issues that fiberglass had, but it's still a lot lighter than metal, so it'll save gas mileage and increase performance. And on that note, go ahead and complete your assignment on part 4 and have a good day.